This is James Angelo. I'm the broker and owner of Florida Homes Realty Mortgage. I want to go through some of the proposed changes that are coming out regarding the NAR antitrust lawsuit and go through some of fact versus fiction. There's been a lot of dialogue back and forth as far as what this means to the industry of real estate, the consumers, whether buyer, seller, and of course the agents themselves. So I want to take out some of the mystery of this. I want to go over some of the factual items that are in there and take away some of the fear or anxiety that a lot of real estate agents have in our industry, as well as just give some basic information, whether you're a seller or a buyer or a professional in real estate. This will be a benefit. I do want to say to the people that are in real estate that there's hope. By no means in any way does this eliminate the framework of real estate where sellers and buyers go to a professional to help them purchase or sell real estate. That will still continue. There is no change in that. Now, the process or the methodology or some of the frameworks will change, but the actual need for a professional to help a buyer or seller get through the various transactions, that need is still there. That need has not changed. So for any of those who have anxiety that somehow the real estate industry is not going to continue, your profession is not going to continue, that anxiety is false. You do not need to have that. There's no basis for it. And if you actually go through the proposal, you'll find out the more that you read through it, the more security that you'll feel that yes, your profession is intact. Yes, you have a job. Some of the processes will change. Some of the paperwork will change. Some of the laws surrounding compensation may change. But yes, your industry will continue and so will your profession. I want to start off with the basic premise that the National Association of Realtors has reached an agreement to resolve the nationwide claim. Now, this is a proposed settlement, so this has not been finalized. This still has to go through the courts. It still has to be approved by the Department of Justice. So as of the recording at this moment, this is proposed. This has not been deemed acceptable yet by the Department of Justice. This has not been deemed acceptable by the court system. This is simply the proposal, but it will give you at least an accurate idea of what the proposal is and take some of the mystery out of it, as well as some of the false information. I want to start with probably one of the biggest elephants in the room, and that is that the seller absolutely will have the ability to pay a buyer's agent. That will continue. Now, how they actually pay a buyer's agent or do that compensation or pay that fee or commission, that process may change and some of the paperwork may change, but their ability to pay a buyer's agent is still there, which means that whether the seller directly through the brokerage, of course, through a closing, through a brokerage firm, whether the seller ends up paying a buyer's agent quote unquote commission, or whether the seller gives some sort of concession to a buyer so they can then pay the buyer's agent, that's still some of the semantics that are going back and forth. That's the paperwork and the process and so forth is still being ironed out, but the underlying ability for a seller to pay a buyer's agent is still there 100%. It is in the proposal. It is crystal clear. So a seller absolutely will be able to pay a buyer's agent going forward. Again, whether it's through commission or whether it's through some sort of concession that they give to a buyer. So the buyer then can pay the buyer's agent, whichever that mechanism is, the seller is able to pay the buyer's agent going forward. Now, if any of you have any social media or you've watched any news channels, you're going to see a whole host of articles regarding the settlement. And most of them tend to be of somewhat of a gloom and doom, particularly from a real estate agent's perspective, that your career is ending, your ability to earn money may not be there. And that media spin, I'm not saying what's causing it, but there is a lot of false representation. So the media will spin the news and will not always accurately represent what's being proposed. I won't give fault on what's causing it, but the narrative is not always an accurate reflection of what's really been proposed in the actual proposal. Again, these changes will not eliminate a buyer from being paid, either from the buyer by themselves, as far as the buyer's agent, or the buyer's agent being paid by the seller. Here's some of the main takeaways. NAR, first of all, is continuing to deny any wrongdoing. So the settlement they're proposing does not mean they're admitting fault. The settlement is subject to court approval, and the settlement at the moment is proposing a 4-year period in which they would pay approximately $418 million. And that would be a national settlement. Critical achievements. The proposed release does resolve most of all members across the United States that have NAR membership. The cooperative compensation remains a choice for consumers when buying or selling a home, which means that a seller can still pay a listing agent, a seller can pay a buyer's agent, a buyer, in theory, can also technically pay a listing agent and or a buyer's agent. That is open to discussion based on the individual offer that is being submitted on a case-by-case basis. There are no preset norms. There is no sort of preset commission. Nothing of that exists. It is an individual case-by-case basis where on every offer, the seller is going to evaluate the net benefit of that offer to themselves. And that seller is going to then evaluate to figure out if the terms and conditions, commission, meet their satisfaction or not. And based on the overall terms, that's what they're going to decide. Some of the main changes. The requirement for a cooperative commission is now optional. What I mean by that is there is no requirement that when a listing is taken, that the seller has to offer any cooperative commission to a buyer's agent. The number they're allowed to, by the way, just for clarity, they still can choose to, but they don't have to. Advertising a buyer's agent commission in any MLS field or third-party system using MLS data is prohibited, which means if a seller decided to offer a commission to the buyer's agent, and let's say they decided to offer a commission, the MLS will no longer, regardless if the seller wishes to offer a pre-stated amount to a buyer's agent, that MLS system is not going to show it. That, as well as any third-party site that may actually get some data feed from an MLS, they will also not show it. The final compensation for a buyer's agent must not surpass, by the way, the buyer's agent agreement. And all realtors and MLS participants must now have a buyer's broker agreement executed before touring or showing any home to the buyer. Now, this is nationwide, so I'm going to go over that. Again, before a buyer now sees a property, before they actually view the property or tour the property, every real estate agent, including the listing agent. So if a listing agent wants to show their listing, or a buyer's agent wants to show some other agent's listing, all agents, before showing a property, the buyer must sign a buyer agreement or buyer broker agreement, which would specify the commission amount that the buyer's agent wants to command. So you're looking at a nationwide, not just the state of Florida, not just any particular state, but in all 50 states, it is now mandatory that before a home is shown, a buyer's broker agreement will be executed, which will specify the compensation, whether a flat fee or a percentage that the buyer's agent wants to make. And that will be upfront. So any buyer that's now going to see a property will have to have a buyer exclusive agreement signed. Now, one aspect of that is that all commission amounts are negotiated with each party before the offer, which means, unlike before, where a buyer's agent, if they were going to show a home, and let's say it had a 2% buyer's agent commission in MLS, well, there is no MLS as far as showing a commission amount. There is no amount that was shown in the MLS. So every offer that basically comes in, if an agent is representing that buyer, is going to most likely have some sort of fee or commission on it. And then the seller is going to independently review that and figure out, do they like the terms and so forth. Now, that could be the terms of cash buyer versus finance buyer. It could be 1% commission versus a 3% commission to a buyer's agent. It could be I'll close in 20 days versus I'll close in 6 months. It could be no contingency to sell my house versus yes, this has a contingency. And the seller is going to look at these offers and say, well, based on the totality of what this offer brings to my life, as far as what the seller is trying to achieve, they're going to choose the best offer. And we all know that sometimes it's the dollar amount, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's closing costs, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's the commission amount they have to pay, sometimes it's not. Sometimes the repairs are expected, sometimes it's not. So what you're going to find is, as it was before, the seller is going to evaluate the purchase contract coming in, and based on how that purchase contract, which also will reflect the buyer's broker agreement that the buyer's agent wants to get paid, they're going to take that total experience into account, that total net experience, to figure out, yes, if they want to accept it or not. Now, the seller's contribution to the buyer's commission can be negotiated within the purchase contract. So when a purchase contract comes in, the seller is able to negotiate the terms that they wish to do. They can say, yes, I will cover a portion of the buyer's agent commission. They can say, I will cover none of the buyer's agent's commission. They will say, I will cover all the buyer's agent's commission. But I do want to point out that the amount of the seller contribution, or the amount that the seller wants to cover for the buyer's agent, cannot be more than what the buyer's agent has on their buyer's agreement. So if the buyer's agreement has 2% as far as what the buyer's agent has agreed to accept, and the seller was willing to pay 4%, the buyer's agent cannot receive 4%. The maximum amount of money that a buyer's agent is able to receive is what is shown on the buyer's broker agreement, and that is the maximum compensation that they can get for this transaction. Settlement language. It eliminates the requirements that the seller must make an offer to pay the buyer's agent, which I've just stated. It also eliminates the requirement that the MLS must show compensation to the buyer's agent. This is actually not prohibited. So some of the norms that took place before, where the MLS always showed the buyer's agent commission, is now prohibited. They will never show it. The requirement that the seller has to offer or partake in a buyer's agent's commission is now completely optional. There is no requirement of that. And again, that will be negotiated on an individual basis as an offer is made to that seller on each purchase contract. The proposed requirement prohibits other third-party sources, such as an example, such as showing time, or other web technology from displaying buyer's agent's commission, which means you can't cheat. You can't say that I'm not going to show it the MLS and then have some data feed to another website where all these commission amounts show up. You can't do that. You can't rig the system to try to circumvent the proposed legislation or agreement between NAR and the plaintiff that eventually is ruled upon. So any third-party site that has these data feeds from an MLS, from board, and so forth associated with NAR, they cannot have any compensation shown to the buyer's agent. They just can't. Now, various NAR and MLS policies will have to be rescinded. One example was Article 16-6, which again has to do with commission. There's no longer a mandatory cooperative commission. It is completely optional to the seller. So a whole host of rules are probably going to have to change from NAR, possibly your state association, the board or MLS rules themselves. All of those rules or conditions are going to have to be rewritten to conform with this proposal. So there will be no conflicting NAR rules or association rules in your state, or rules from the board that you specifically belong to, or the MLS system, that violate the proposal that is ultimately approved. So here's one of the big questions. Should you pre-negotiate a cooperative commission with your seller? You know, at this junction, it really is up to the listing agent and the seller how they want to handle listings. It has always been, because the proposal is that if this is enacted, it would not happen until possibly June, July, and it's only March at this moment. There's still this gap. So for those of you that want to still on their listing show that the seller will upfront pay a commission, that is perfectly legal at this moment. There's nothing that's forbidding you to do that at this moment. Now, once the rule change happens, you will not be able to do that. There will be no upfront as far as in the MLS. Now, the seller can still give an upfront commission, but they can't show it. Ultimately, the seller will evaluate the buyer's agent's commission on a case-by-case basis. Now, this is just speculation. So this is not legally bound. This is not a legal opinion, and this is not legal advice. But like anything, the longer something happens, the more of a norm that it sort of takes on, sort of a life of its own. So if you go through this and you're a seller, and you know that you're going to get offers one after the other on your property. And most of those offers, let's say, are going to have a buyer's agent. But every buyer's agent, as they talk with their buyer, because they have to do this now, this is a requirement. Every buyer's agent is going to have the buyer sign a buyer broker agreement, which will most likely have some fee or commission amount in it. So if you're the seller and you get an offer, and that agent on the buyer agreement has a certain percentage, and let's say the agent wants to try to incorporate that fee or that commission in the offer, so the seller will pay it. And then another offer comes in. Well, they may not be the same amount. One agent might say, well, I'll do it for 3% as your buyer's agent. And someone may say, I'll do it for 1%. Some may say, I'll do it for $10,000 flat. Each agent gets to negotiate the fee that they want to receive per buyer. So as these purchase contracts come in, I think, again, without it being a legal opinion, I think that you're going to see more and more sellers not predetermine upfront the amount of commission that they want to pay a buyer's agent. Because if they're really going to evaluate every offer independently, which means the total, which means the terms, price and terms, which is the sales price and the binder they put down and the commission that the buyer's agent is being paid, and possibly that they're asking the seller to pay part of the buyer's agent's commission or all the buyer's agent's commission or none of the buyer's agent's commission, whether the buyer has to, again, it's contingent upon the sale. Their house is not contingent. One is cash, one is financed. You're going to find that sellers are most likely not going to predetermine a dollar amount, because they know that every purchase agreement that comes in is going to have all of these specific qualities. And one of those qualities is the commission rate that the buyer's agent is wishing to be paid, which the buyer has signed on a buyer broker agreement. So if they get multiple offers or over the time of a listing, if purchase contracts are coming in and it has 3% and a 1% and a 2% or a 4% or whatever it is, if you have a seller and they upfront determine, well, I'm only going to pay X amount, it may possibly hinder their ability to freely negotiate based on the offers coming in. So I think that you're going to find more and more that the longer this becomes the new norm, the new way of operating in the real estate industry based on the proposal, again, without being a legal opinion, I believe that you're gonna find more and more sellers saying, look, I'm gonna put a 0 for the buyer's agent commission at the moment, with the understanding that, yes, I do understand that virtually all the purchase contracts coming in from a buyer's agent will have some sort of commission on it, whether they ask me to pay for it, whether they're gonna have the buyer pay for it, whether they want me to pay part of it or all of it. I think that the longer it runs, you're gonna find that they're probably not going to upfront actually pin themselves into a specific dollar amount, and they're gonna basically figure out what's the net experience to me as a seller. So I do think the longer it runs, you're probably gonna find that sellers are not going to predetermine the commission amount, but until then, you are welcome to do either or. You can have the seller upfront at the moment, predetermine they will compensate a buyer's agent a certain amount, or you can put 0, and then on a case-by-case basis, you can negotiate that independently in the purchase contract that is being submitted. Now, there is a really large silver lining that's really overlooked, and one of the huge settlement impacts are that agents have a new ability to negotiate seller contribution to pay a buyer's agent's commission at the time of offer. What that means is, unlike the prior construct of real estate, where the seller predetermined what a buyer's agent was making up front, regardless of the offer, regardless of the terms, a buyer's agent now independently actually gets to set the amount of commission or fee they want to work for. Sort of similar to what a listing agent did. If you were a listing agent, when you took a listing, you normally determined, I want to list your property, I want to represent it, and this is the commission amount I want on the listing side. Well, now on the buyer side, agents can do that as well. They can say, look, based on my experience, based on my ability to negotiate, based on the time and effort, based on what you're trying to achieve, this is what I want as compensation. Up until this point, the buyer's agent really had no influence or ability to impact what they earn as an individual. Now they do. So there really is a silver lining to this. Up until, this proposed settlement, buyer's agents were completely dependent upon the random number that happened to be displayed in an MLS system. And whatever that random number is, whether it was high or adequate or low, that's what you're paid. And that's it. There was no back and forth. There was no adjustment for the contribution that you made as a buyer's agent. Now you can actually negotiate yourself based on your professionalism and your skills and the influence you're going to do in this process. You finally get to determine what you're going to be paid for. So there's a lot of negative or gray noise regarding the settlement. And I feel that if you're a buyer's agent, you're completely overlooking one of the major facts that you finally get to determine what you want to make in your profession. Given all buyers will have signed a buyer's broker agreement, sellers will now entertain each offer independently. What makes this fair, which makes this a new norm, is that every buyer, prior to seeing a property, whether it is the listing agent or a buyer's agent, the buyer has to sign a buyer brokerage agreement. So, and this is now also across the entire United States. So any seller who lists a property is going to see the new norm that all of those purchase contracts that are coming in, if there's a real estate associated with it, there is some sort of fee that the buyer is agreeing that the agent will be compensated. Now, whether the buyer pays it or the seller pays it or some split between the two is really up to the parties themselves, but the norm. It also will eliminate, if you're on the real estate side, if you're a real estate agent, if you have ever been a real estate agent and you own a dozen properties or 20 properties or 30 properties, and all of a sudden, after all of the work, whether it's a week or a month or multiple months cultivating a buyer, and then they basically say, actually, thank you so much for all the work you've done. Thank you for showing the property. I'm just going to use a different agent to write the offer. That no longer happens. There is no, I'm just going to call a different agent now to write the offer. You have a buyer's broker agreement that pretty much says you are the agent and you will be paid for the properties that you've represented. So it really eliminates a lot of the heartache that buyer's agents have suffered with. So if you're a buyer's agent, some of the key takeaways, one, is for the first time, you actually get to predetermine what you want to be paid instead of somebody else saying, this is what you're going to be paid, whether you like it or not. You get to negotiate that on a case-by-case basis, as well as if you're working and you're showing property to a buyer over a short period of time or a long period of time, they just cannot choose to arbitrarily call somebody else and say, well, that person's going to write the offer. Thank you for all the work you did, but you're not going to be involved. That's also now eliminated. So there's really two large positive takeaways that are being overlooked and most of the dialogue that I hear from an agent's perspective. And that's important. So if you're on the buyer's agent side of this coin, you should have a little bit of relief that you finally get to determine what you should be paid, as well as all these procuring clause cases and all of the instances where somebody simply uses you as a door opener indefinitely, simply to call somebody else that they have in their hip pocket to write the contract, which is blatantly unfair to do. That practice will now be eliminated. So that should give you some peace of mind that from a buyer side standpoint, your book of business is better, not worse. The new buyer broker power: to see a house, you'll have to sign a buyer broker's agreement with somebody. So when you meet a buyer, if the buyer says, well, I want to see the property, I understand it's listed for sale, but I'm not going to sign your buyer's broker agreement, I'll go to another agent. What makes this more of a norm is that at some point, the buyer is going to have to sign the buyer broker agreement with somebody. And if they go, I'll just go to the listing agent. Well, the listing agent is a real estate agent. They also would, again, have to sign a buyer broker agreement. So whether it's a listing agent, a buyer's agent, they're going to sign it with somebody prior to seeing that property. And that is across the entire United States. This gives buyer's agents more control over negotiating their compensation than our current environment. And that should give you a heck of a peace of mind. The fact that you can finally negotiate your commission independently, and you do not randomly get some number that happened to be predetermined that's showing in the MLS. That may be high, maybe low, maybe average, who knows? I mean, whatever dollar amount you had in your mind that you wanted to earn, maybe that was above it, maybe that was below it, maybe that was about average as far as what you as an agent want to try to earn. Again, you're looking at a period where in our current environment, as a buyer's agent, you simply had no choice as far as what you were to earn for your work. Again, if you determined that your worth was a certain commission amount and you saw a listing in the MLS and that was that hit about the average of what you wanted to earn for yourself personally, then you were probably satisfied. And if it was higher, you were probably pleased. And if it was lower, you were probably disappointed. Now you have the ability with each buyer to determine, this is how I want to be compensated. And the buyer absolutely gets to choose. They can say, I agree with it, I don't agree with it. But one way or another, they're going to have to choose to agree with someone, some buyer's agent or some real estate agent, whether it's listing and buyer agent. They're going to have to agree to sign some brokerage agreement or buyer broker agreement before actually seeing that property. And that's really what gives you the power that you have a much better position to set what you believe your worth is based on your profession and what you're going to bring to the table. There are three fundamental elements that are going to define a real estate agent's success. The first element is really the financial commission model that the agent is on and that you're on. Brokerages that have a higher commission split, the 50-50, 60-40, 70-30, agents are going to fundamentally challenge paying those traditional models, the split that has existed for the past 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. You're going to find where Florida Homes has an adaptive high commission split for the agent where the most of the money is retained in their pockets. If you're an agent and you're trying to navigate the changes that are coming forward, which again aren't going to take place until it's even proposed to July of this year, of 2024, July 2024. If those proposed changes do take an effect, one of the elements that you as an agent need to make sure you align correctly is to make sure that you do receive a fairly large portion of the commission dollars that you are able to charge on the listing side and also the buyer side. So where Florida Homes has a very, very high commission split, aligning yourself with a company like Florida Homes, who really, again, is sort of in the forefront, has always been the forefront to make sure that we have the business structure to have you succeed, is going to be vitally important. You know, the other aspect, which probably is going to be, it's not normally touched upon in these conversations, absolutely has to do with the listing side. The support the brokerage provides to its agents to focus on developing a listing agent practice, that support is paramount. But it's not just the training support, it's not just the motivation support. At Florida Homes, we have a financial support to our listing agents. So if you're a listing agent and you're trying to mitigate the environment that looks like is going to be our future, you know, our company absolutely has what you need to catapult and continue building a substantial practice as a listing agent. And one way we do that is to help take the burden and that risk of the money you have to spend as a listing agent, particularly the advertising and marketing that you do for these listings. Now, you're going to need to display even more that you not only have the ability to go through the process of real estate, but you'll also have the ability to tell the seller, this is why you should hire me, because I'm going to show you the various ways I'm going to market your property and advertise it. And yeah, it needs to be in fairly worldwide and nationwide publications, New York Times, Robb Report, and a whole host of others that we actually provide. Our company fundamentally takes a lot of that risk off the agent. There's a substantial amount of marketing and advertising at Florida Homes Realty Mortgage that we give you to help your success where you don't have any out of pocket. You don't pay that money up front. We actually cover that. And then there's also a substantial amount of risk we take off the table. So if those listings don't close, you don't pay that bill. That bill is covered by the firm. That obligation is removed, so you don't have that risk of loss. If you do not have a firm, you know, and Florida Homes obviously is in the forefront to make sure you have a dynamic listing career, particularly going forward with the new rules, where the company not only gives you the support and the training and the motivation, but also the financial backing, which means you can afford to take as many listings as you want without worrying about going out of pocket for a vast amount of the marketing. And you can take as many listings you want without the risk of, if the listings somehow don't close, whether it's title issue or buyer reason, whatever it is, you don't lose that money. That's not a loss on you. You don't have to worry about that loss of expense that basically came out of your pocket. And then the final item really comes down to the support that Florida Homes is going to give to our buyers agents. You know, the brokerage must provide an experience that enhances the process that the buyers go through to actually sign those buyer brokerage agreements. And to clarify a little bit more, particularly that Florida Homes absolutely is going to have the physical products and the digital products to make sure that experience that the buyer goes through, so you can actually get the buyer broker agreement signed, is extraordinary. And it really has to take both elements. Florida Homes Realty Mortgage absolutely is going to provide you the physical products you need, whether it is the buyer exclusive agreement itself, whether it is marketing material, whether it's a buyer package or packet that you can actually show every buyer physically in person, as well as digital products such as mobile versions, something you would do on your iPad, iPhone, something you can email, video presentation, e-signature, anything that's necessary so you can basically have that buyer experience digitally to actually get that signature from the buyers that you're trying to represent. Again, I really thank everybody for watching this. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to reach out to me. It's James Angelo, and this is my cell number, and I'm at 904-412-7889.